For a lot of us, we find a lot of success in cybersecurity, and especially with a lot of the talks on this show, we find a lot of success within pen testing and offensive security. But imagine already having a successful and lucrative career doing something else, and then switching into cybersecurity. This week, we're going to talk about just that. We're going to be interviewing my friend Travis, who is actually a licensed medical professional. That's right. This individual has a medical degree, is a licensed medical professional, and then realized that after being a medical professional and being a doctor and treating others, that he still found an interest in technology and in coding. So this episode is going to talk about his journey as a medical professional, as a doctor, and how he still juggled his hobbies that involved coding and technology while he was doing all of this. And then how that eventually led to him becoming the cybersecurity professional that he is today. So you're going to want to listen to this one. So don't press that pause button. Don't skip the video. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of Offensive Security Interviews. Welcome, everyone, to Offensive Security Interviews. This week, we have someone very interesting, and that really diverts from what we've been doing in the past. We actually have someone who is a licensed MD, physician based out of California. We have Travis Nesbit. Welcome, Travis. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, John. Hey, everybody.
And so Travis is going to talk about today. He's going to talk a lot about his experience as a medical professional, a lot of his experience of being an MD, and rather it be like going through school or actually being an MD, and how that it has, worked in his favor as he's transitioned into into the technology field. So this is going to be an awesome, interesting conversation. And, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So Travis, with that being said, let's go ahead and allow you to tell us a little bit about your background in the medical field and what honestly got you interested to pivot out of that into tech.
Cool. All right. Well, am I going to answer out of order real quick? Because actually the tech interest came first. I growing up, my family was not very well off, and I didn't get my first computer until I was almost an adult, right? But my grandma had recently remarried, and her new son, my new uncle, he was a Unix administrator, and he's like, "You guys don't have a computer? Well, let me put one together." And I was fascinated by the fact that he, took all these spare parts out of his closet, put it together, and gave it to us for a Christmas present. And that kind of took me from, pothead skater kid who got kicked out of high school to having a real interest, So I'd spend my free time, taking the computer apart, putting it back together, and, programming little balls bouncing around in QBasic and stuff like that. And I was actually going to go into comp sci first and foremost, but for those of us who are old enough to remember, back in the early 2000s, there was a lot of, I don't know how else to describe it, kind of like fear-mongering about whether or not you're going to get a job ever in tech due to outsourcing.
Oh, yeah.
In hindsight, that's almost kind of funny, considering, the state of H-1B visas and the tech industry. But anyway, I got kind of sufficiently scared. At the time, I was, dating my then wife, and, her dad's a dentist, and I was like, I think I'll have to do something different. So I ended up joining her in an intro to anatomy course in a junior college, and they they do these career corollaries, and they had physicians on. I'm like, oh, that looks cool, I'll do that, I used to be a personal trainer and all this other stuff, and it seemed kind of similar. I liked my job as a personal trainer, helping people, turning their life around. I was like, this seems like a good alternative. So I kind of went off to medicine, and when I went into medicine, there's certain things I absolutely love. Like I love being able to, work with people who are very motivated and actually watch them turn their lives around. I've had people who have severe diabetes who think they're going to be insulin dependent really work so hard to get their diabetes out of the severe zone into the, hey, I'm just taking 1 pill of metformin a day, and my life is probably going to be extended by a decade or two. That kind of stuff is very, very satisfying in the outpatient setting. I really, really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the hospital setting too. But at the same time, there's a lot of for me, very frustrating elements of practicing medicine. For one, it's just very, very fast-paced and algorithmic. There's not a lot of problem solving. I had initially got into it because I told you some of the reasons. The other part was I assumed there would be a lot of intellectual stimulation and problem solving. It really kind of wasn't. So it was a lot of road activity under increasingly tight deadlines, and anytime you managed to get through enough patients in time, you were just rewarded with more patients rather than more free time. So I was like, and all during, and all during that time, I kind of never lost the tech bug. I was busy, but I would say sometime probably around, sorry, my dog's bugging me again, sometime around 2012 or so, I was in medical school, and I kind of started picking up playing with the PC again, just getting in Linux and just hacking around. Mm-hmm. By the time I was in residency, I really started kind of getting personally disillusioned with how things worked. And that's just me. I mean, some people totally love it still, but for me, it wasn't quite for me. So I started spending a lot more of my scant free time, and scant free time is legitimate. I mean, most of the time I was working, 60 to 85 hours a week for what ended up being like $4 an hour as a resident. So you don't have much free time, but in that free time, I like to, I'd crack open, various Linux distributions and just do stuff, right? Connect services, write C programs, crack open GDB and just see how things move in memory, and I was eventually able to land a spot with the UC Irvine Health Policy Research Institute, where they needed someone who understood medicine to help deduplicate a very large data set. So that was the first time I got to actually apply my computer skills to something useful in health. Anyway, from then I really enjoyed it. I had a great time. It was very simple, right? But it really kind of spun me off in that direction. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to use my medical subject matter expertise in the context of my interest and my passion for basically all things computers to improve healthcare in a number of different ways, and that's probably a long conversation in of itself. Anyway, I had to find ways to continue to improve my skill set so that I had something of value to give to people. Because the catch is, when you come out of medical school, especially if you come from a background where people can afford to help you get through it, and you end up with massive debt, like massive debt. So I couldn't afford to easily transition out of medicine into something else because nothing else can afford to pay my debt off. So I had to really kind of start working on a skill set that would be valuable enough to get me in the door. And I tried all kinds of different routes. I worked part-time in concierge medicine to keep my skill set up, or so that I could, for the UC Irvine Executive Healthcare Program, so that I could focus my free time on building out web apps. And I was doing some custom work for them. I ended up working for a health tech startup called Forward, pretty awesome forward-thinking company out of Silicon Valley. The initial idea was that they were going to involve me more in on the engineering side of things, or at least have me working with some of the engineers. But they were growing so rapidly, I kind of got pigeonholed into the clinical side of things. And it was just kind of the same, grind. But I didn't kind of lose that motivation. And I was like, well, I actually had planned on here recently moving out of the state, because I was like, okay, I need to find a way to get my costs down so that I could devote more time and energy into this. I was going to move out of the state, work telemedicine, work part-time, and then start a master's program. And as part of the transition, I signed up for a per diem job at the California Department of Corrections for their correctional healthcare system. And and while I was there, I blast everybody when I apply for a job, though, with both my clinical skill set and my my programming skill set, my tech skill set. Someone there, I guess I won't give out names and stuff like that, but he contacted me literally the first day I had showed up at the job. He's like, okay, I've been sitting here with your CV on my desk for a month waiting for you to start so I can call you. How would you like to come work for me? And I was like, tell me what it's about, and it ended up being extending basically a very popular electronic health record service, developing front-end web applications. There's some back-end development involved too, but it's in a very interesting proprietary system that I don't know, I could talk a little bit about, but not much. There's some details missing, but that's kind of how I ended up here. And since I've been here, I'm really enjoying it. There's some challenges working with the state, but the team's really great. My boss is, he's got a great vision, and in the last few months we've made a lot of progress. I'm having a great time. But in order to kind of keep that value high, basically as of this morning, I've officially started my my master's in computer science as well.
It's interesting that you went to school, you got your MD, right? And that in of itself is a feat, right? That's what, 7-8 years of schooling at least.
Yeah, and it's pretty intense. I mean, I don't think people get an idea what it's like. I don't think as much as compares to it. It was routine that every month we would do a test, and it was like 5,000 PowerPoint slides. Oh. So, yeah, not joking. 4,000 to 5,000 was typical.
That's crazy. That is crazy. So while I know you're still fresh into your program, did it? I mean, we're on as we're recording this, it's January 14th. Mm-hmm. So what? While you haven't done it, you're still like obviously in week 1, week 2 of your curriculum. What are some traits, I guess is the best way to put it? Because a lot of students, will say cyber programs are intense, and I'm, as someone who has done cyber programs and is still doing them at a terminal level, what are your takes on seeing these high caliber cyber programs, such as the one that you're doing with Georgia Tech, which is actually a very high accredited one? People look up to it a lot. What are the similarities you see between the requirements and the level of effort for those degrees versus an MD degree?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no. So I'm happy to answer this kind of fun question. So going in, I think there's actually quite a bit of similarity in terms of the mindset. A lot of people going into medicine, they're very interested in problem solving, but it's more like human problem solving as opposed to computer problem solving. But yeah, there is that computer or that problem solving element to it. And then on top of it, just very hardworking. We all know that not every degree is the same. Computer science and the associated fields of study are generally considered to be hard for a reason. There are a lot of work. There's a lot of abstraction that people really have to work hard to grasp. And a lot of times there's no short way around it. You just got to put in the time to write the code. So hardworking and curious are two traits that I think are very similar amongst med students and people in various cyber fields.
Right. Yeah. No. I love that you say that, and I feel like I'm gonna make a statement, and I feel like it's one of those statements that I'm thinking about it, and if we were physically in the room together, I would either get a smack across the face, or I would get a high five.
Plus, I'm a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy, so I don't do much.
Okay, you just kicked my ass. Okay, no, there would be no slap across the face. It'd just be an ass kicking. Okay, so with
ankle pick first, right?
I've always told people, especially because I'm an educator, I teach various IT, cybersecurity, and computer science courses, as well as being a PhD student myself in cyber operations. I've always told individuals that if you want to be good at this, in this field, especially in academia, you almost have to treat it, you have to have the same diligence towards your curriculum as a medical student would to be in their program, if that makes sense. Like, in a kind of with what you were just saying, like, you have to be curious, you have to love problem solving. It's just, instead of people, it's computers. But it's still that rigorous, like, there's no easy shortcuts. You got to just do it.
Yeah.
And I guess the long-winded thing that I'm saying to peak it is, I always tell individuals, if you want to be good at this, you have to treat it serious. Like, someone who's in med school has to treat their degree like a full-time job, because otherwise you're not going to get what you need out of the program. And it's not going to give back to you what you're expecting.
Yep. And one thing I'm already kind of seeing, there's a huge difference. You don't see it so much in medicine. So when you go into medical school, they're legitimately the academic cream of the crop, right? So they all had to get, top GPAs. Then they had to go in and get the MCAT, which, if you're not getting a top 10 percentile score on your MCAT, you're probably not doing so hot. You have to do all that on top of volunteering, at least probably 500 hours to really be kind of considered competitive. So it's really, really hard. What I have seen that you do eventually see in medicine, but it's like delayed. You see it after people get out of residency, is that there's a huge difference in competency, and it seems to come down to I don't even want to say intelligence. I think it's motivation, like intellectual curiosity. So there's some people who are curious and they want to dig and they want to get the answers, and they're very self-motivated to keep doing the next step and learning the next thing and asking the next why. Those are the people who end up being very, very, very good. And then there's some people who didn't have that same level of intellectual curiosity, and and they kind of just skate by. Now I have had an opportunity to kind of work with some developers, and I've also seen physicians after they've been a few years out of med school, just kind of at different points in their career. I'd say you run into the same problem, which is at a certain point people stop being curious and they stop being self-motivated, and then that's when you kind of start fossilizing.
You essentially become a zombie, just sitting there, working to pay off those student loans, those medical school student loans, right?
Yeah, exactly. They get jaded. They don't care if they run into a problem. Send it to a specialist.
Right. Yeah, can't tell you how many times. I'm sure like anyone who's listening will be like, oh yeah, so that's why that happens, when they're like, oh well, we got to send you to this person instead.
Yeah, exactly. It's easier just to say. And there's time, this is an aside, but there's literally times where rather than having the primary care doc work a little bit extra to find out how to solve the problem up front, you'll get more reimbursement for sending off to a specialist. I've never actually been in a situation. I've been an employee, so I've not benefited from that reimbursement myself, but I've seen employers actually say, hey, you need to, send out X percent of patients to specialists. And then you're like, why? And then you find out it reimburses higher to just say, go to someone else than it does for me to fix your problem. So it's kind of obnoxious.
It's interesting, and not that like it has the same impact as it would on people's livelihoods and their wallets, and like, also I think the difference between like cyber and like healthcare is that there's like this unwritten code, I guess, moral code about like, it's healthcare. People shouldn't get the sales pitch for their own healthcare, right? You should just be given the best healthcare because you're a human.
Yeah.
And to be upselled a service because of that sense, it kind of like demoralizes everything, versus like with computers, you kind of expect it, right? And and yeah, so it's interesting, and I think it's a good segue into the next question is, and I think it's a question that you can answer both sides of very well, is because of your experience in tech and as an MD. What was your experience as an MD working with tech professionals, and how did that look? And then even on the other side, now that you're a tech professional, how does it look when you're working with MDs?
Okay, that's a fun question. So I guess I'll kind of clarify, give a little bit of information on my background. So, I am, as of yet, I would call myself a jack of all trades, master of none, with my highest degree of competence being in software development. But I have done some information security. I have done some IT. I have done some work with my brother who owns a small to medium sized business managed service provider, and I hold director of software development over there. But I've done IT work with him, and then my interest in InfoSec has been just recreational. War games and capture the flags and stuff like that. Hey, you know, and I didn't realize, but I'm at least minimally competent. A couple years ago, and that was probably even 3 years out from the last time I studied it seriously. I was invited to a capture the flag event at Tavora, down in Irvine,
Mm-hmm.
and I had no time to prepare. I hadn't cracked open Kali in probably a couple years, and I was invited to join. I was like, well, I'll just observe. An hour in, I got the bug to try, and so I spent the next hour setting up my development environment, or not setting up my environment. Installing a Kali VM and setting it up. So I got started a couple hours behind, and I was there by myself, and most people working in teams. I ended up, getting someone to join me a couple hours behind, but I still finished third place, and I was kind of surprised. And sometimes I feel like maybe I'm a little bit critical because I understand the degrees of complexity people work with when it comes to the various forms of bureaucracy that come with, large companies and government and stuff like that. But it does get quite frustrating for the most part. I'd say most of my experience is with IT. I wouldn't say information security professionals. I don't think I've ever worked with information security professionals directly, and I think that's probably a problem with the IT department. They probably should be working with more information security professionals.
Good insight.
Yeah, it's really frustrating because it's like they'll sit and they'll complain at me about the stupidest stuff, and I'm like, I know of at least umpteen people that are recycling the same password for this critical service, and you're worried about this little thing I asked you for, and I'm like, okay, or you're hosting critical files on this Windows share drive that everybody has access to. By critical files, I mean like program files. Scripts too. So it's not like not everybody can open up a binary and reverse engineer it and start modifying the code. That's tough. But cracking open something in JavaScript and modifying a few variables is not so tough.
No.
And so it's like hosting critical information on Windows share drives that people are using all day, every day, and like you hardly even know how many people have access to these files. So that kind of stuff's very, very frustrating for me because I'll try to get support for some of the things I'm doing, and they're worried about me being a security risk, and I'm like, I probably better than most understand authentication and security. Not say better than most, not like a professional, not like you, but better than most people in the organization. And I would say better than most IT people I work with. So then it's always really frustrating when I'm getting roadblocked for silly reasons. And simple stuff, like there was a password change policy at an employer, and it's like they're like, oh, here's your criteria, and they set a lower bound, not an upper bound. Next thing I'm locked out of my computer for a whole workday because the service they installed that's running a layer above the Windows logon service actually has an upper character limit to the which is kind of ironic for a security service, has an upper character limit to the password field, and it's just like lots of little things like that I've run into over the years that are kind of frustrating. So long story short, my experience with IT, not necessarily information security, has been in the context of big organizations, usually big organizations that are governmental or peri-governmental, like universities. And for me, I just hope to God that a lot of them start employing information security professionals and taking them seriously. That's my experience.
Yeah.
Because
no.
it's like, I don't know how many times you crack open a newspaper any day of the week, and some other health organization just became a victim of ransomware. It's like, well, we got to get everything up, and there's $100,000 to get everything up, and that's people not even really thinking about what they've got when they've got access to all this health information. I mean, so this health information, it's a literal treasure trove for for identity thefts and stuff like that. It's a big problem.
Well, you think about the attack paths too that can come derived from just finding a health document. Like I think a lot of it, you hear a lot from, individuals that don't understand it as well. And I'm not saying like they're, ignorant by choice. They just don't know it because they might, especially like healthcare professionals. You were saying as a MD, you're working 80 hours a week. I'm sure a lot of people listening are like, you're doing what? And you're still finding time to code? What?
Not anymore. I'm finally feeling old now. I'm almost 40, so it's like.
But at the same time, like, you don't care. You're not worried about the security of everything. You're worried about, like, when are you going to eat and sleep? um,
Right.
and with that being said, like, I discovered too, to give a little bit of my background in academia, with my graduate degree, I did my capstone it was like a capstone applied thesis kind of thing. Was I did a penetration test on a medical facility, on a small independent medical facility. That was
Yeah.
my first look into the lackadaisic security controls of healthcare. um, and like all the stuff that you're saying about like not even having authentication, having these sensitive documents on a central file, it's real. And you're like,
Yeah.
it's not even fake. And it's so simple too, because you talk to the individuals in those offices, and a lot of times it's not that they're oblivious by choice. They're oblivious because they're so overloaded with their regular job to where they don't have the time to focus on like, oh yeah, I got to put in a password for my central file server. Oh, that's easy. And then, life happens and they work an 80-hour week and then they totally forget. And those files, like, yeah, someone's name and address and obviously a social security number is not good to have, but like that leads to so many other things with healthcare information, right? Because healthcare information has like who's your next of kin, who's your beneficiaries, like all that stuff, and that you can create a very big, nasty, rooted issue, right? That creates this
Oh,
nasty
exactly.
branch.
Yeah, and it's not only that, but when let's say, for example, a person is hospitalized and they become dependent on the rest of their family, usually that social worker, that doctor, all these people are going to be having detailed conversations with family members, and they document these detailed conversations with family members. So you get in there, not only know the patient, not only know their social security, you know all the names of their family members, you know where they live, what they do for work, and if you want to talk about the opportunity to social engineer, you've got it. Like you could be Uncle Jeb that nobody knew ever existed real quick, and it's kind of yeah, it's a little bit frightening to me that there's not a greater level of awareness. I mean, because social engineering is leaves people vulnerable enough as it is, right? Call someone up. Oh, hey, I'm so and so with IT. People are having trouble with their Internet Explorer or their Microsoft Office. What version are you running? Okay, then see what CVEs are out there for that version. Blah blah blah. Send them an email. You found them on their Facebook account, and next thing you know, they've run an email, and you've got a reverse shell connected or something like that. And
Right.
when you add on all of this personal information on top of it, you create the opportunity for huge victims. And most of us benefit from being small fish in a big pond. But if I were a massive celebrity, I'd be afraid to go to the hospital if for no other reason. Just the fact that the infosec is so lack, and someone's going to know everything about me as soon as someone has to call in and ask me questions about my health.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? It's crazy about the security controls that you think you got to put around that. And as someone who has worked in pen testing and offensive security, and also done like basic security audits as a consultant, the level of impact that a security audit has versus a pen test for those instances is dire, in my opinion. And some people might think like, dire what? Yeah, like it's because of that information that you can get and the trickle effect that it can have an impact on someone, where it could lead to ransomware. It could lead to an IoT device, like that company that office might be using a particular distributor for their medical devices, which essentially are like IoT devices now.
Mm-hmm.
It could impact that. There's so many things that could happen, and a security audit is just like, yeah, we went through and we gave them this piece of paper that like said what they were good at, what they weren't, and what they needed to improve, versus a pen test would be like, no, this is what happens and this is the impact of it. And hey, here's like all of your machines going down because you didn't, implement this proper control here.
Yeah, right. Or, hi, we've got access to your primary domain controller. And it all started with that camera over there someone installed and never took off the default password. It's like, it's great, high definition, but now I've got security guard's badge information, and it's like,
It's
And that's one thing that's always crazy to me is like how often people install network utilities, usually cameras and routers and stuff like that, that are just they all continue to sit there forever and with default usernames and passwords and stuff like that, and those are huge problems.
yeah, yeah. I think without even commenting on it, I think it's a good way to segue into to the next thing I was going to ask is just as yourself as like you're essentially you're a subject matter expert in the health field, and because of being a tinkerer with computers and doing all that stuff, you're a very high proficient enthusiast, and becoming a subject matter expert in computers as well is IoT, man. A big reason why I got into pen testing was because of healthcare, because I saw like the fact of like being able to hack pacemakers, right? You're gonna literally stop someone's heart because of something. I mean, it's arbitrary, but it's something as simple as not resetting username and password on like to access the underlying system of the pacemaker, right? And I know that sounds far fetched, but it's honestly that simple. I mean, and it's even more dangerous because those things are like Bluetooth, which is open authentication. And
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
yeah, so like honestly, man, the concluding of all that is like, what is your thoughts on security and health IoT devices?
As of right now, I kind of feel like for anything relatively critical, I feel like the developers should to keep everything outgoing data streams only until they have a much better handle on information security. Because same thing. I mean, like the idea that you can modify a pacemaker or an AICD via Bluetooth, kind of nuts. I mean, this is well, yeah. I mean, like imagine you're I'm just going to use this as a hypothetical. We'll say there's an ex-president named Chick Daney, and ex-vice president.
Okay, eats lots of McDonald's.
Yeah, and everybody knows he's got heart problems, and you happen to get in within Bluetooth range, and he's got the fanciest AICD on the planet with all the Bluetooth stuff like that, and you're like, well, let me just let me just sit there and modify the settings, maybe maybe we won't start pacing until the heart rate hits 20. At that point, you're already, incapacitated and, dying on the ground, or, we'll turn off, the ability to shock with a dysrhythmia, and it's like, I don't really know. I'm not that into the cardiology IoT, but I know how people think, and everyone's going to want to do it. And people do first and ask questions later. I worked in startups now. I know how it is. It's like you advertise before you have anything, just so you can get the press release.
Yeah. I'm thinking like, yeah, people do that. And I'm like, why do they do that? I'm like, oh yeah, that's why they do it. They do it so that they can put it out there, and then people will start to catch up, and then they can play catch up with what they're putting out there.
Right. Secure the funding before the product's done, so that you can make it work.
Right.
And sometimes it doesn't end up working, but yeah, it is kind of scary. So there's some IoT devices that I don't know what people could really do that's that useful. Like if it's just telemetry data, you probably can't do too much. Hopefully it's, I'm not gonna say de-identified, but it's got minimal amounts of identifying information on it. But there are certain areas where I really do have some concerns. And you brought up an excellent example, probably, for good reason. You're an expert in the field. But I have the same concerns there that you do. Or at least that you said in that example.
Yeah, well, I mean, too, it leads back to that, like, think about it as like, for anybody listening, like if, your grandparents got a pacemaker in and nobody's changing the firmware on your pacemaker. Nobody's replacing your pacemaker with the brand new one, right? You're getting if you got the one from 2010, granted is if it's still working, you ain't getting it taken out.
Right. And who knows, maybe you had the budget developer, programming the microcontroller, and you run out of memory and something bad happens,
Right. The other thing is too is like those healthcare, you know, those healthcare records get leaked out, and they find, like, if you're a high, like if it's your average day person, like yes, it does have an impact on that individual's livelihood, but those aren't going to be the people. Those aren't going to be the people that the malicious individuals are going after, right? It's like you said, like if there was a president with a pacemaker and his medical records got leaked out, or I'm sorry, their medical records got leaked out, they would, if they realized that they had this, you know, outdated piece of equipment in their body, somebody's gonna target that, right?
Right, and you know that's probably how it starts. But we all know kind of like the hacker's equivalent of the, you know, like the script kiddie could eventually exist for, you know, the world of IoT. You know, like maybe you're just some little punk kid. You're like, you walk up to someone, you know, and you're like, oh hey, I noticed you've got this pacemaker going. If I, you know, I've already got access to your pacemaker. Thanks for making it my favorite dog 123. You know, and you know, and yeah, I'm just going to run this script and scramble all your settings, you know, and it's like, well, good luck getting to your doctor. Somebody can fix it in time. Who knows, you know, like it's a hypothetical, but, you know, just because it usually starts out with high profile people doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. Because the technology becoming more ubiquitous, you know, that works everywhere, you know, it's going to, everybody starts to have it. And there's lots of ways to, you know, to harass people. You know, for some people, you know, threatening someone for a couple $1,000 is worth it. You know, for other people, you know, you know, they're probably going to be, you know, a much bigger catch than that. But yeah, I think ultimately everyone will be at risk as long as information security is not a first-class citizen before these things get pushed into production.
Mm-hmm. This is a question that just popped in my head that I want to ask before I forget it. I think it's a good way to peak everything that we've been talking about. Is your experience as a medical professional, but then your desire and passion for computers and just technology has its growing, right? Because I mean, whether we want to accept it or not, we live in a technology era, and it's here to stay, and it's going to keep moving forward, and we got to keep up, or we're going to be drowned out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And would you ever think about like a way of how you could be a pioneer yourself of like to combine those two things together, essentially, where, you know, you could be a medical, I don't know, like a medical cyber consultant. I don't know. Like that sounds like a corny term now as I'm thinking about it or saying it out loud.
Yeah,
But like
yeah.
a way of how to peak those two together.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I actually think about that a lot. Luckily, I think some of those opportunities are creating themselves around me. You know, and don't require any of my own creativity. I know a lot of the big, you know, the mega corps out there, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple. They're all starting to move fairly heavily into the health space. And Microsoft really, you know, they're doing a lot of really cool stuff. With, you know, with Nuance, especially, I see a lot of cool stuff they're doing with Nuance. But you know, I feel like they're creating opportunities that are going to be a great place for someone who has like the intersection of subject matter expertise that I'm working toward. And then, to some degree, I probably have more than most people you're going to meet. But aside from that, there's other stuff I really would like to pioneer one day. I have this idea. I'm a big open source software fan, like many people in the computer science and information security fields. Mm-hmm. And I'd kind of like to take the almost like the Red Hat approach to electronic medical records.
Interesting.
You know, because there's a lot of the challenges that come with working with electronic or medical record systems are, you know, it's interfacing information, right? You can't get them to play well together. And I can tell you, like, I would sit in the hospital. So and so came from X hospital. You know, here are the records, and it's 300 pages printed on paper, and it may have showed up 12 hours after the patient, right? And that's kind of crazy. You're tearing through 1,200 records by paper because there's no search functionality. It showed up too late, you know, and it's all because we've got this rat race of, in my opinion, relatively incompetent people driving the health software industry. It's health software is like 20 years behind. It's bad. It's really bad.
Yeah. I mean, we just talked about like pacemakers, right? I mean, there's software embedded in those. We talked about the lax security controls built into healthcare software. No, fair enough. That's good. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, and just, I'm sorry, most of the time interface is more important than implementation, but that's like before something becomes antiquated, you know. Um, and anyway, I feel like one of the ways we could solve, a problem is making, an electronic health record system that is just well designed and is valuable enough for people to adopt, and then the next thing I mean, Linux has taken over the internet, right? If you hear the word server, it's almost assuredly Linux. Even on the Microsoft Azure cloud, there's more Linux boxes than Windows boxes on the Azure cloud now, which is kind of crazy. Then Microsoft was smart enough to see what was coming and kind of go with it. And I feel like something like that needs to happen with the electronic health record system. Give people something that's so good they just have to use it. And I think the open source community is the place to do it. I don't think we're going to easily do it inside of any one corporation, because who wants to invest the 500 million or $1 trillion into something that's not going to generate a lot of funds right off the bat. It has to be because I'm sure it's going to be very expensive. There's a reason people aren't doing it. But I would love to see something like that happen and take part of it. But who knows? I mean, whether that'll ever happen, no idea.
I mean, hey man, you put the idea out there. So if anybody's listening, hit up Travis about it. And y'all can go change the world and people's lives, literally. So yeah, so awesome, man. Well, we're pretty much coming to time now. So let's to wrap up, and conclude all this is like, let people know now what you're doing. I mean, you've kind of talked about your passions, so just kind of like a cliff note of like what you're doing now, and your hopes with like you getting you're at Georgia Tech right now, getting your CS degree, even after being an MD, you're getting a master's in in computer science, and just kind of build on that, and where people can find you if they want to talk to you to pick your brain.
So much appreciated. So again, right now I am developing software for the state's correctional healthcare services, kind of extending the electronic health record system that we have there. And it's been quite fun. There's a lot of very unique challenges, and I've got a great team of people I'm working with, and I think it was I think they had to work really hard to get to a place where they could start doing relatively revolutionary things inside of that healthcare system. But I think it's really starting to take hold, and it's been a lot of fun. I see myself continuing to do that for a while. I don't really know. I mean, at a bare minimum, the state has pretty darn good benefits. But with that, I'm hoping to, I basically kind of fought in my head for a while whether I was going to try to see if I can carve out a niche in health information security. I really did want to do that because I find information security extremely interesting. I probably like it more than software development. It's just that I've had a harder time or talking to people who feel like I could derive as much value at the intersection of health information and information security, partially because there's just not the awareness there should be about how important it is. Mm-hmm. And then, information security versus kind of like specializing in machine learning and taking that to healthcare, because there's a lot of things that doctors and allied clinicians do that they really shouldn't have to, we could build out solutions for. So I kind of opted toward going toward the machine learning route. I'm actually starting out taking introduction to information security course because it's so fun, right? So I'm starting out there. But yeah, the ultimate plan is, machine learning and continuing to really kind of focus on the intersection of health and software, but specifically building out solutions using machine learning. And if anybody want to get in touch with me, don't judge me on the website. It's something I literally built out in a few hours on a weekend and haven't done anything with. But geekmd.io.
Geekmd.io.
Yep. So it's easy to access, geekmd.io. You can get a hold of me there. Um, I had planned on doing all these things. I actually invested in 3 LLCs this year that I was building out independently, and my career took an unexpected turn for the better. But they've all just kind of sat there ever since. So I'm not doing much with at least 2 of them. And anyway, but that's the easiest way to get in touch with me. You go to geekmd.io. Travis at geekmd.io is my email, but that has a contact form, and I think like I said, I built it, and then I wrote like 1 blog post, and then it was like life went a completely different direction.
Yeah, I think to finish off too with just one comment is that you talked about the projects that did kind of like go to the side and everything, and you're sitting here talking about like LLCs and everything, and I'm sure the people listening, there's probably numerous, if not every single, it's like the every single cyber computer professional, it's kind of just like the way of the land. We all have like GitHub projects just like kind of sitting in graveyards, or we got some kind of side hustle that we were like working on and just kind of start collecting dust. It's just kind of the way how it goes, and you start building things, and whichever one starts to scale and catch on first is just the one that like tends to happen, and then the other ones kind of get put on the back burner, and you catch up back to them later, or you don't, right? And
yeah. In this case, I don't think I'm gonna have the time to go back. I think this was a pretty hard right turn. But who knows? I'll hold on to them, especially the reason I give out the GeekMD contact, because I plan on doing something with that long term, and I plan on keeping that open. But I'm not doing a lot of consulting or anything right now, just because I don't have time. I'm working full time, going to school, so it would have to be kind of like it would have to be. Well, and I am doing one side project. I've got a web app I'm building out for a dermatology company. So I'm just stacked. I don't have time to do anything else.
Hey man, our projects, they get to be the fruit of our labor and the fruit of our passion, but at the same time, we just want to take them on, and then before you know it, a week, 2-3 weeks into it, we're just like, man, I forgot, what day is it? Is it light outside? Is it nighttime? What time is it?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
you just get so engulfed in them, right? So
100%.
all right.
I feel like that encapsulates a lot of my life.
Well, all right, man. Well, Travis, thanks again for being on the show again. For anyone who wants to contact him, you can get a hold of him at geekmd.io. Go submit out a form and everything, and you can get in contact with him. So again, Travis, thanks again for being on the show today. Really interesting talking to you. And for those of you listening, reach out to Travis if you want to get a hold of him.
Thanks for inviting me. It was fun.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening to this episode of Offensive Security Interviews with my buddy Travis. If you want to reach out to Travis, we'll make sure that all of his information is in the show notes. Again, if you want to be on the show, you can always go to offsecinterviews.com, go fill out the form, and be a part of the show. Thanks, everyone, again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll catch you at the next one.